Let's say you are working on a project and you see lot of annotations. So you can see here there are different Spring Boot annotations which I have mentioned over here. You see at the rate component configuration, bean, enable auto configuration, REST controller, and you are a little bit confused about what are these annotations, where to apply this, how you can use in this particular code. Then in this video, I'm going to explain you what are these particular different annotations. I'm going to discuss the top 10 annotations which are used by the every Java developer, and he must be knowing this because if he is working with project, he should be knowing all these annotation, where it is applicable and where to use those. Let us first discuss about the @Spring Boot application. Now this annotation is one of the important. Now if you look at this annotation, it is going to be the convenience annotation that is going to be the main class of your Spring Boot application. So wherever your Spring Boot application has your main class, so you will be able to see this particular annotation applicable over there. Now this annotation is a combination of @configuration and @enable auto configuration and then component scan. So we'll definitely look at that annotations as well. But if the interviewer asks you about it, that what exactly this annotation is about, or if you are trying to understand what this Spring Boot application annotation is about, it's a combination of these three. Now where do you use this? This is applied on the main class of your application. So if you have a main method, if you see here right away, so this is the main method over here where I've written this particular annotation over here. Okay. And this is going to be allowing you to enable auto configuration that is going to do the scanning for you. So this is going to be very, very handy annotation. So this is the must annotation you must be knowing about, and you should be able to explain it accurately what exactly this annotation is about. Now, if you open this annotation and you will see these annotations, whatever we have discussed, the configuration, annotation, the component scan, these are all, you can use this. Now, there might be a question around saying that whether I can, without using this particular annotation, can I use these three annotations explicitly? The answer is yes, you can definitely use this because this is kind of a shortcut of it. Because with this single annotation, you can achieve all these three. But if you wanted to do the manual activity, then you can actually do this by adding all these three annotations and then configuring accordingly. So I hope I was able to explain you what exactly the Spring Boot application, where it is applicable and how you can use it, and also shown you where exactly it is in the library. Let us take a look at the second annotations, that is the component scan. Now this is one of the important after the Spring Boot application. Now this is one of the stereotype annotation which is going to indicate that the class is annotated with the component or a bean. So this should be managed by the Spring container, that is the IOC container. So whenever you mark this component to any of this particular class, it is going to be considered as a component and a bean, and then the Spring will configure that particular, it will manage its life cycle over there. So it is going to be the general purpose Spring managed component, and this is not going to be a more specific, it is going to be the more general at the category. So now if you consider, there are different annotations which are like @controller, @service, @repository. Now these are specific related to the layers, and that wherever they are applicable for the context they are used. But when you apply @component, this is going to be the general stereotype annotations, and it is going to be used in the general component. Okay, so it is not going to be anything specific. Now how do you apply this? If you see here, I have actually created a component over here, and then actually I have marked it as an annotated over here, and this class is actually annotated with that. So in whenever the Spring Boot application is getting started, when your application is getting started, now Spring Boot will internally check this particular, it will scan this, and then it will actually open that particular thing. Because if you see this annotation, we have already checked it, right? So this is going to check it what kind of annotations are there, and then it will automatically configure all this particular bean. So this will be considered as a component, or it will be a bean, and then it will manage its life cycle over there. Now, as an example, we saw that how we can use this. So if an interviewer asks you what is this particular annotations and how it is different from @controller, @response, uh, his controller and other things, so we will further discuss that as well. But these are going to be this is annotation is going to be the general, and that particular annotations are very very specific, and it is going to be the relevant on the layers actually. Now he can also ask you another question, whether this particular component can be replaced with any of these annotations like @surveys or @controller. The answer to is yes. uh, but if you see at the principles or at an the desired principle what it has, so that is in the, it will be put it in the wrong way, because those annotations are written for their own specific behavior, and they are intended to be added to that particular specific layer. Okay, even though that can be used up, it is not suggestible to use that. It can be written over here. Instead of this, I can actually write service also over here. The compiler will not throw any error. The Spring Boot will actually manage this particular bean as it is how it is managing. But this will not be the ideal case, because this is not the service, right? This is a general component, so it should be annotated with the component only. So if interviewer asks this, please reply with this particular answer. Let's look at the third annotations, which is @configuration. Now if you look at this particular class, so this @configuration, this is going to mark your class as a source of a bean definition. So whenever your Spring Boot application context is required, is used over there, this is going to identify that this is the source of the bean identification. So it will mark that thing. Now to define @configuration class, you have to declare as an @bean, that particular method for creating this particular and configuring the Spring Bean. Now this is one of the modern way. Earlier there used to be an XML based approach. Now this is an alternative way where you are using it in the Java base. So this is a Java alternative for XML configuration. So let us look how it can be applicable over here. Now you check it out. The application class config class is over here, and I have defined one class over here. So I want this particular class to be created as an bean or at the configuration, right? So this has to be created. Now here if you see, I am marking this particular class as the annotations, and I want this particular class as a bean over here. So in that case, this is the first thing what you have to do. Then only it will recognize the next annotations of that particular bean or component, whatever you define, and it will be applicable over here. So if you don't define this, then this will not be able to recognize this, and it will not be creating that and managing that particular life cycle of that particular bean. So it is applied at the class level, this configuration, and then in order to define that particular bean or a component, you have to annotate with the bean or a component over there, and then you can use it over. So this is one of the important annotations, and it is also the part of that particular Spring Boot application. And look at the next, that is bean configuration, that is bean annotation. Now this annotation is used along with configuration, which we already saw in the last example. Now this is going to indicate that particular method which is going to produce a bean that is managed by the Spring Boot IOC container. Now when you are using this when you are trying to explicitly configure and expose an object of the Spring Bean, especially if you are dealing with third-party libraries, or when you are dealing with objects that require some complex setup, now in that case you use this @beans. Now here you have to define this particular annotation configuration. Now along with this, you have to define this @bean over here. Now this particular bean will be created and managed by the Spring IOC container, and it will be taken as a bean over there. So in this way you can achieve this particular annotation and can be used up in your project. Let us look at the @enable auto configuration annotation. Now this is one of the annotations that is working internally as part of the Spring Boot application, which we already saw, where at the top of that we will see that there are different annotations. Now, along with this at the rate configuration and at the rate enable configuration and at the rate component scan, this is going to be the annotation which is at the rate Spring Boot application. But if you wanted to manually define those, then you can actually define this like this way, and then you can write your main class to run this. Now, this is going to be having the same impact of this particular demo application which we earlier already saw with single annotation. So that this is how you can actually use this, because this is going to tell the Spring that how you want to configure your bean, what is based on this jar dependencies you have added. It is going to automatically configure your Spring application, and it is going to implicitly handle via at the rate Spring Boot application. So if you are building an highly customizable application and you want some control of writing that particular configurations in, then you can actually opt to write this particular three annotations and then do your manual, so that you can use this with your own customized things. So this is where you can interview can also ask you, why actually I need to write this, can I write this three and then achieve the functionality? Of course you can do that. This is how internally it works. Let us look at the REST controller example. There is an annotation called at the rate REST controller. Now this is going to be marking that particular class as a controller. So first of all, when you define this at the rate controller, then this is going to indicate that this is a controller class, and under this particular methods has to be serialized and copy that particular object and return that particular objects either a JSON, XML, or whatever format you want as a response. So this is going to directly write into that particular HTTP response body. So it is called a convenience annotations because it is the combination of at the rate controller and at the rate response body. Now if you want more information on this, I have made a video on this where I have explained what is at the rate controller and at the rate controller and at the rate rest controller. So I have explained in brief what exactly these two annotations are, what are these at the rate difference between at the rate controller and at the rate rest controller, and when do we use at the rate response body. So please check out my video on that. I have very briefly explained that part. Now coming to this particular point, you will see that this is used for building the web applications, RESTful applications services. So whenever your methods are exposing and it want to return some data, either JSON or XML, then this is going to be returning that particular data directly. Now if you are aware that in the previous versions where we didn't had the Spring Boot and you were working on the model view controller approach, and we are trying to return something from the controller, it was requiring the view name instead of that particular data. So it used to ask for either timeleaf or an HTML or a web page where it used to return that particular data. So in that you can used to configure the model as well as the data, and then you used to return to the view page. Now in this case, instead of directly going to the view page, it is going to return to the data, actual data in the response of JSON or an XML. So this is the difference when it comes to at the rate controller and how you can actually make use of it. Now if you take a look at this, I have defined a controller over here. So this is going to be marking as an controller, and whatever requests are coming from the request from the client is going to land on this particular controller via dispatcher servlet. Now if your URL is having this particular endpoint, then this particular method will be called up. It will also check for what kind of request it is, like whether it is a get request, it is a post request, it is a put request. So the HTTP has got different methods which it uses for different purposes. Now in this case we are trying to retrieve something from the server, hence it is returning a string message over here, normal string message. Now in this case you can actually, if you want some a customized JSON, so in that case what you can do, instead of this you can actually create your own custom object over there and you can try to return that. Now in that case it will return the JSON and the XML without you doing anything. Okay. Now as I mentioned earlier, if you check out my other video, I have explained you how you can, previously it was done with only the at the rate controller and what are the things you need to make the changes, but here you simply have to annotate with the at the rate rest controller and it will be taken care of. Let's look at the at the rate request mapping. Now if you take a look at this is one of the mapping or annotations which are used when you are dealing with the applications who is going to serve some request. Now let's say you are mapping your web request to a specific handler method over here or a class, so this particular annotation has to be used up. Now it is applied at the class level if you are trying to specify the base path, or it is also applicable to apply at the method level if you wanted to define some specific endpoint over there. So if you define this URL path and your that your controller, and it will going, this method is going to handle the incoming request, that is the HTTP request, and you can specify that what kind of method it is. In this case, if you see, it is a get method over here, so it is going to be get method, post method, put method, delete method. So these are the media type which is going to be consumed. I mean, it can consume that particular media type also, and it also can produce that particular media type, that is either JSON, XML, or other things. But these are the getter methods and the HTTP methods and the media types it can return up. Now in this example, if you take a look at this, this annotation is applied at the class level also, and it is applied at the method level also. Now under this, if you make a note at this URL has to be mapped up. After that, this particular URL, it will be adding up with this particular, so the URL will look like this. Whenever this particular URL is landing on this, it will be, so if this particular method has to serve this particular request, then it has to be in the ending with this particular URL, and then it should be a get method. Then only this particular method will be invoked up, or else you will find some, like, you will not be able to get that particular 404 or any other server error, right? So you will be able to have to map this particular request over here. So this is how you do with the request map. Let us look at the another annotation, that is at the rate get mapping. So if you take a look at this, now this is going to be one of the specialized version of what we looked just before this particular example, that is at the rate request mapping. So whenever we wanted to serve any request, that is HTTP request, which is a get method, so we can make use of this get mapping. So instead of writing the request mapping, along with that defining the method type, so in this particular way, one shot you will be defining and telling that Spring IOC container and the controller that this is the get method, and you have to land on this particular method wherever it is annotated on that particular method, and then it is going to serve that thing. So whenever you want to retrieve some data from the server, so this is going to be the very concise and the clear way by using this particular method annotations over here. So instead of using at the rate request mapping and then you're defining the method, you can directly define this particular annotations and directly map it. So you doesn't have to write a boilerplate code by first defining those things. So in this single thing, the method also will be written, decided, and also the URL also be added over here. So in this way, you can actually serve this particular request. Then comes post mapping. Now this is exactly similar to that particular annotations. Okay, if you take a look at this particular class, you have this particular user class, and then under this particular controller, if you see, you have this particular post mapping. Now instead of let's say you are trying to return this particular user data as a string, so in that case what you can do, you can actually map it with the at the rate post mapping. Now you see here, I have not added any post mapping over here. It is directly being mapped to this particular users, and this is one of the naming convention. Whenever you want to return some user, you are making use of that particular noun along with that, and then this is the URL which is according to the REST principle. So here if you see, here actually I'm returning this particular with the help of at the rate post mapping. So it is now you, one thing actually you make a note of here is that this is going to be the request body. So the request is coming as in JSON over here, and then it is getting mapped to this particular component, that is class over here. This is called either DTO, or and you can actually define this in any of this particular class. So we can map it to this particular request, and then from that request you can further call the service layer, then we call the repository layer, then the database, and then retrieve it and return it. Okay, so that's how it works when it comes to the post mapping. So ideally when we use this, because it is whenever you want to create some resources on that particular server, so in that case we use this particular at the rate get mapping. So That is when actually when we use this. Look at the put mapping. Now this is another variation of the @request mapping, which is the version of HTTP method, that is put. Now this exactly is a specialized version of a request mapping, and it is going to handle your put request. So whenever you want to update your existing resource on the server and you want to update some data, okay, on that particular server of that particular resource, then you can actually use this particular put mapping over there. Now it is going to be exactly similar way. Now here I have made use of this path variable, is just a one difference over here, but this is one kind of the kind way. But you can actually use this put mapping, and then you can actually have this request body defined to get that request and then update that particular resource, and then you can return it. So this is how you actually define those things and then run those actually. So this is what, how you deal with put mapping. Now there are different annotations as well, where you can use like, you have @delete mapping also is there for if you want to delete it. Now there are annotations like autowire is there, service is there, repository is there, path variable, request param, request body, response body, @valid, and that is cross origin. Now these are different annotations which are used in your applications or projects when you are working on. If you want me to make a video on these other annotations as well, please post a comment in the this video section so that I can actually look and make the video. If I get lot of likes and comments on this particular video, I will definitely make a video on that part. Hope I was able to explain you all the different annotations, the top 10 annotations which are frequently asked in an interview questions. Also, these are the core annotations which every Java developer must know. So if you are preparing for an interview or are attending for an interview, or you are upgrading your knowledge on the Spring Boot, these are the must know annotations, because these are the annotations which is going to be the core of your application. Now, if this video has given you some value, please give us a thumbs up. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Thank you for watching.